We have a motion to accept tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Dr. Harrison, over to you for district updates.
So good evening, everyone. A few important things that I wanted to touch base on this evening. The first is to follow up regarding the look that we were taking at expanding the Dow's Lane AM/PM attendance model to second and third grade. As the community and board is aware, a couple weeks back, we facilitated a survey to, bless you, to all Dow's Lane parents seeking their feedback as to whether or not they would support such a move. During the forums that led up to that survey, I had routinely indicated that it was important to ensure that we had a significant majority or supermajority of the parent community behind that move, recognizing that such a change in student schedule mid-year could be problematic for many families. Unfortunately, the survey came back with fewer than 50% of the second and third grade parents supporting it. In fact, it was just below 48%. And when we looked at the first and second grade data, it was even less supportive than that. Therefore, we found ourselves in a situation where we understand that it would be problematic for many families to make that move. We know that a number of our teachers and our school leaders at Dow's Lane were supportive of such a transition. So we decided that it was important for us to take a look at some educational data to see if we could identify rationale and really to quantify the case to make the move. Our Assistant Superintendent for Instruction, Mary Ellis, along with our leadership at Dow's Lane and our instructional coaches have been busy reviewing that data. And at this point in time, it's not presenting a compelling argument because when we look at the benchmark data that they are evaluating, our students are doing about as well as they would have over the past 2 years in the mastery of particular skills. And where if we had seen a discrepancy there, we still would have been left with some challenges in looking to decipher how much of it is that general COVID gap when we think of the change in experiences, when we think about the impact that the school closure back in the spring may have had on teaching and learning, let alone the impact of what's happening now. So it would be difficult to pinpoint specifically the effects of the hybrid model versus an AM/PM model having on student performance or student academic growth at this point in time. So Mary and the team are continuing to review that data. We are also taking another look at full day attendance at the elementary school, but in doing so, I have to admit there's many hurdles to overcome. We're looking at how we can schedule the building, understanding that we have to maintain the social distancing of 6 feet and the mask. If there's any question regarding the need to do that, you can certainly see on our Facebook page and Instagram page a message that was posted by George Latimer that is calling for that across the county. So we have to continue to monitor the density in each and every space in the school. We simply just don't have enough rooms to go around. We're trying to be creative and think how we can use all of our large spaces, such as the gym and the multi-purpose room. But even if we can fit everybody into those particular spaces, the challenge then comes to being able to support technology in those rooms where we don't have smart devices or smart display boards in those spaces. We don't have the technology drops there. So let's say we could overcome the technology. Another challenge, though, becomes the need to supervise children because we'd have to be splitting classes. So currently, in looking at this opportunity, again, if we could find space, if we could overcome any of the technology hurdles that could be before us, we would have to come up with staffing of at least a dozen, if not more, additional aides or monitors to be able to supervise our children and support teaching and learning. So there's lots of challenges there, but I want to assure the community that not only are we continuing to look at data that may support a move or expansion of the AM/PM model to grades 2 and 3, but we continue to look at opportunities to expand daily attendance for all of our students at Dalles Lane. When I say that, I say that in a time when we recognize that the COVID numbers are increasing rapidly. And we need to keep in the back of our mind, our priority needs to be keeping our schools open in the model in which our students are attending today. When we think about increasing attendance, whether that is in the AM, PM model or a full day attendance, we have to recognize that there's greater challenges in trying to manage any kind of spread that could be present, and that a single case would have a much greater chance of actually closing the school or having more folks quarantined. So we have to keep that in the back of our mind, that it is a double-edged sword in that if there is an outbreak, the impact could be greater than if we were in a limited or reduced density attendance model. So there's a lot to consider. I want to assure the community that this is not an issue that we have dropped or we have stopped looking at, but we're continuing to look at it through a variety of different lenses. And in the coming month, I'm sure we will come back with any of our findings. We will present all related data to the board and the community so that you can see everything that we've looked at and understand the educational data, the space constraints, financial constraints that we might be facing in all of these areas that we are exploring. One thing that has really been garnering a lot of our attention and our time across the district in recent days has been our planning related to the New York microcluster strategy. Here, we're looking at what would happen in Irvington if we were to be designated a yellow zone, just as we saw Terrytown was within the past week. So going back a few days ago, I sent out, last week, a very detailed communication to the community outlining all that is involved with the requirements for the New York microcluster strategy. If Irvington UFSD was to be designated as a yellow zone, our schools would remain open. However, we would have a requirement to keep them open where we would have to test 20% of our students and staff that are attending in person. So in that testing, it would be tests that would be provided by the New York State Department of Health. They are not PCR tests, the type of tests that we require for folks that were exposed to come back in the school, not the tests that are required for folks that are traveling outside of the area to come back to school. This is surveillance testing. So here we are utilizing antigen rapid tests because it is surveillance in nature. If through this process, one was to test positive, we certainly would request that those individuals go and receive a PCR test that the Irvington schools would not be administering, but we certainly would take those steps to make sure those individuals were then quarantined. So when we think about the testing, within the first 2 weeks, we would have the responsibility of testing, as I said, 20% of students and staff who are attending on site for work or for learning, students that are learning from at home through 100% distance learning, or those staff members that have an accommodation to work from home would not be included in those to be tested. We would then look at that data that would be submitted to New York State. If the positivity rate was less than the rest of the Irvington school community, so if our sample within the Irvington schools was less than that of what was designated as the Irvington yellow zone, we would not need to test further moving forward. However, if we were in a place where our numbers came back higher, our positivity rate was greater than that in the Irvington yellow zone, we would then in the next 2 weeks need to repeat testing of a different 20%. And we would continue in that pattern until we fell below the average, or we were in a position where the yellow zone was lifted. If it was to be essentially promoted, meaning that the situation was to be worse, the positivity rate was going to be worse for the Irvington community, we hit an orange zone or a red zone, heaven forbid, our schools would then close. We would transition to 100% distance learning. And at that time, there's different protocols that we would have to take to be able to return to in-person learning. But again, I wanted to clarify that we would have to test 20% and we would do so within the first 20 weeks, or for 2 weeks. Today, Ms. Stein and I had a fabulous meeting with a private entity that we are looking to contract with that will be providing the testing services for the Irvington School District. This would be medical professionals that would come in, licensed nurses, that would administer the testing for our school community. We are planning really a contactless experience where it would be a drive-through testing plan where students would ride up to a particular designation in the school district. We would have a whole registration process associated with this, of course, and literally would have the test administered while you sit in your car. That way, we're not looking at having folks that could potentially be identified as being positive with COVID and then being present in the school environment where then we would need to quarantine you and face those other challenges that would be present. Tomorrow, I have a detailed communication going out on the subject, and from that will be a link to a consent form asking parents to grant consent for their children to be tested for this requirement. And by putting this out now and setting our plans now, should Irvington fall into a yellow zone, we will be ready to go. As soon as the Department of Health delivered the test, we would schedule our testing. We would identify and notify all of the children and staff members that needed to be tested. And then everybody would receive appointments via email indicating what time they should be reporting for their testing and what that location would be. So I ask that you look for that communication that will go out tomorrow that will provide numerous other details on the subject. One other thing that I want to update the community on before I pause and allow the board to make comments or ask questions, and we also have our school physician, Dr. Huff, that will join us shortly. I want to talk about holiday travel. Going back last week, I also sent out a very direct, frank communication related to holiday travel. And in that, I asked us all to share in the sacrifice, to really, really limit our interactions, to stay within our own homes, and to certainly not travel outside of the area. And I want to be really clear about what has to happen. And this isn't Irvington rules. This is New York State regulations. That if a family chooses to travel outside one of the states that do not border the state of New York, you have two options. The first option is that you have to quarantine for 14 days upon your return to New York State. We certainly would encourage you to be tested. During that time, you are not supposed to go to work. Our students are not supposed to come to school. Our students will, of course, have the opportunity to engage in their learning remotely, but that would be 14 days of quarantine from the date that you return. The second option, while it may not be easy, it is the appropriate path to take. If you were to travel outside of New York to an area that was on that quarantine list at one point in time, you would have to have a PCR test taken 3 days before you departed that location. And then when you return to New York, you would have to quarantine for 3 days. On day 4, you would have to have a second PCR test administered, and you would have to have 2 consecutive tests that are negative. The one from wherever you travel to, and the second from here in New York. Again, if you travel to Texas, 3 days before you depart Texas, you need to have a test completed. When you return to New York, you need to quarantine for 3 days and then have a test completed on day number 4. You will need to have both of those tests for your children to return to school. I want to say, as I said last time, I don't want to be a travel agent. I don't want to be a Facebook spy, and I don't want folks to be sending me pictures of everyone's images from Facebook. But I got to tell you, folks, I'm getting them already. I know that there's families that are traveling. I know who's in Texas. I know who's in Florida. And I'm hearing these stories, and there's folks, I don't have time to manage this. I need you to be responsible. I need you to account for the health and well-being of everyone in our school community. So if you travel, please be responsible, be transparent with us here in the school. Notify your principal, notify your school nurse if you're traveling, and then please please comply with those two options and make sure that you're taking the necessary steps to make sure you're healthy, your children are healthy, and that we're not putting other folks at risk. So I'm going to pause there. I may have reminders related to that in my communication tomorrow as well. But I'm going to ask now if we could please promote Dr. Catherine Huff so she can answer any questions that the board may have. She was just there. She's in. Dr. Huff, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Great. So, Mr. Friedman, I don't know if there's question or comment from the board, and we have our school medical director, Dr. Catherine Huff, on the call as well. So, Mr. Friedman?
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. Thank you, Dr. Huff, for joining us. In terms of questions, I'll go last. So I don't know if anyone in the room has a question. Beth, go ahead.
Okay, hello, everybody. Dr. Huff, I just wanted to ask, on the protocols for the school district, we have available either a PCR test or a specific rapid test called the Cepheid, I think it says Expert Express Rapid Test. I'm just trying to clarify if we have additional rapid tests that might substitute for a PCR.
It's a good question, and I think it's probably, can you hear me okay?
Catherine, if you could
Yeah.
hold on 1 minute, please. We just need to
Yeah.
have volume turned up in here because we're having difficulty hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little bit better.
Maybe, is this better?
Much
Yes.
better. There you go.
I'm closer to my mic, so I think that was my fault. So it's a great question. I think it's timely just because turnaround times for PCRs are becoming more extended. I actually spoke with somebody at the New York State DOH today in regards to this, more actually, frankly, related to some specific questions within my office practice. There are two other big types of tests. The molecular rapid testing, it's slightly different than the Cepheid Expert Express, which is a PCR rapid. They're both nucleic acid amplification tests. And then that's separate from the antigen test. The antigen test is what New York State will be rolling out to schools so that you can test 20% of your population. And that test is likely better suited for really screening purposes, testing a population frequently and a large percentage of the population frequently, because then if you miss a test on go round one, you pick that test up, that positive up, go round two. So that's why it's a very valuable tool for screening. It's not so great for diagnostics. So the rapid antigen is really not a viable option. The molecular tests are becoming more, they're getting a little more attention in New York State. And in fact, New York State is piloting programs right now in Port Chester and in Ossining using those tests. I don't know if they'll ever get full swing approval for diagnostics. So for example, the student or staff member who comes to the school with symptoms, they have a headache, they have a fever, they have a runny nose, they have a cold, are those tests going to be viable options in the eyes of the DOH? Initially at Westchester County DOH, they really didn't feel like the sensitivity was good. While the sensitivity in symptomatic people is actually approaching that of PCR, I think it's biased data that we have because it comes from the company itself. So I think there needs to be more investigation, which is being done currently. So the word from New York State DOH is that there might be some more applicable rapid testing in the near future. I think which is important to realize and think about and anticipate because PCR turnarounds now are approaching a week, and that's not so helpful when, I will say most of the children, and kudos to the district for keeping the schools a safe place to be, but as you can see, if you look at the dashboard, there's just not a lot of transmission within the schools. The transmission seems to be coming from outside of the school setting, within households, indoor settings. I mean, we've all read the news, right, where it's probably lying. But the tough thing that I think people are grappling with, and certainly medical directors in the county are grappling with, is that most illness, certainly still within school age children, is not COVID, and there doesn't seem to be that high level of transmission. And so kids are being potentially held out of school for some lengthy time periods with the slow turnaround times for PCRs. Maybe it's a blip, and testing is always a good thing. So I don't mean to even begin to say that it's not a good thing. It's what's necessary, but supplies are limited now and resources are limited now, and PCR swabs are getting diverted to hospitals. So it's very difficult to get a PCR. The wait times in urgent cares are hours now. So I think we're in a tough spot right now. I don't see another option in the immediate future, at least for the symptomatic people, other than PCRs and the COVID Expert Express, unless we're willing to tolerate some level of positivity, which would certainly eke through.
Correct.
Beth, we can't hear you, Beth.
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat myself. So
Thank you.
based on what what Dr. Huff has explained and the superintendent has explained, the current guidance on the school website concerning the specific tests is correct and has not been updated since September 17th. So that provides our community with guidance about what they need to do when they return if they've chosen to travel during Thanksgiving.
That is correct.
Thank you for that explanation.
Thank you. I believe, Erin, you had a question?
Yeah, it was Beth's question. I just want to clarify then, are we requiring a PCR test, or the antigen rapid test is sufficient? Can we just easily clarify that for everyone on the call?
For what?
Okay, I guess, so if you're traveling, is it the antigen test? Is that?
No.
No.
Okay, thank you.
All testing that is required for travel or illness related, we want a PCR test.
Okay,
The only place that we're going to use the antigen test is going to be in state-sponsored screening that the testing will not cost us anything. The state will provide the antigen tests for free. The district will be paying for the staffing to administer them, but that is the only place we will use antigen testing. All other testing, so if someone is exposed to someone and needs to return to school, if someone travels, we need PCR testing at that time.
so then if I may, just so everyone hears this, to get a PCR test, the turnaround time is a bit lengthier, could possibly be 3 to 5 days. So when someone returns from travel and gets a test on day 4, a student potentially would not be able to return for another 3 days to school until the results are received from the PCR test. Just want to make sure we're all clear and understand the potential turnaround. Okay, thank you.
I would just point out the turnaround time, just so you know, it's longer than that right now.
Okay.
The turnaround time is 7 days in our office at least.
Okay, that's good to know. So it's potentially the
For
same
planning,
14-day,
yeah.
right? It's almost the same 14-day quarantine period at that point. Then once you're out for 7 for a result and 4 for the 4th day for taking the test. My only other question, Dr. Harrison, can you just clarify the drive-through test?
I don't know if there was more.
Looks like Erin.
question
Looks like Erin froze.
But so if I will try to anticipate what Erin's question was to be. But if Irvington was to be identified or designated as a yellow zone, and we would have the required testing of 20% of our in-person attendance, we would establish drive-through testing centers on the campus where the tests would be administered. Students would need to have consent from their parents to participate in that testing. There will be a communication going out from my office tomorrow that will provide some more detail on the experience, and will also provide a link to a Google form for parents to issue the consent for that testing. The rationale for doing it through the Google form is that we can have a very expeditious process whereby we would schedule folks for appointments. You would drive into a particular parking lot, report to a tented area, and you would be identified through a system that we're developing with our partner. And then you would pull right up, they would check you off, we'd have your consent recorded, test would be administered, we would immediately get the results, and you would be on your way.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Maura, did you have a question?
Yes. I wonder if Dr. Harrison or Dr. Huff would clarify so that we can prepare our kids for the test should it be needed. What form does the antigen test take? So is it like a throat swab? Is it another, do they have to prepare for a nasal swab, or is it something else?
So it is a nasal swab, and I want to clarify the difference for those of you like myself that have had a PCR nasal swab where the swab goes all the way up. It feels like into your sinuses, right? It is not that. This is a swab where the swab just goes in the lower portion of your nostril, and you swab both nostrils for a brief period of time. So it is not nearly as invasive as the PCR nasal swab test that we're familiar with, either for COVID or for a flu test.
Thank you for clarifying. That was all I had.
Anyone else?
You turn your
Yeah,
mic on.
I have a question on that too. So let's finish the medical and then, yeah.
Sorry, I was just saying I have a question about what we were talking about before.
In terms of the testing, someone who travels, let's use your example, Texas, they're supposed to get a test 3 days before their departure and then retest when they return.
Mhm.
Let's say that they aren't able to test before they depart Texas. Can they then set up 2 tests when they're back in Irvington that are spaced apart to satisfy their obligations, or does it have to be before they leave where they're at?
Well, thank you for throwing the curveball. That is not in any of the guidance documents, and I would certainly have to consult, I think, with the Department of Health, unless Dr. Huff has an answer for us. Because at this point in time, that specific scenario has not been laid out for us.
My understanding is from the Department of Health that it really does have to be within 3 days prior to travel. What I have not seen them clarify is whether or not, if the results are not back yet, because they could be taking longer. If you can, you wait, you get those results, and then you can submit them both. But I have not seen any room for unable to obtain testing at your place of travel. I think it would need further clarification as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Huff. So then what we're really hearing is that for those people who are planning on traveling or who are already away, they really need to secure testing from where they are in order to return. So,
Again, my first recommendation is not to travel. The Harrisons are going to have a lovely Thanksgiving, but it's going to be a very small Thanksgiving dinner in the town in which I live. But if you are traveling, I would say to make your reservation or your appointment for your testing now. So you have it on the books with a testing center where you're going to be. So that way you're not fighting last minute, trying to wait in lines or struggling with the lack of availability of testing appointments.
thank you. Did anyone else have anything?
I do. Michael Hanna.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to share, as we're talking about getting these test dates correct, I have two specific anecdotal, experiences in which people that I know tested negative after 4 days and then positive at the 10th day from exposure. So this trying to game the timing has got me very concerned. I think I would go with Dr. Harrison's first piece of advice, which is to not travel and to be very careful in terms of your contacts during this time.
Thank you. Sure.
For the sake of reiteration, hearing from multiple people tonight and over time, and for the 10 attendees and their multiple friends outside of them that are not watching, please, traveling is not a great idea. It's 1 year out of time. I think we all could, take a nod from community living and help one another out. That's all.
Well
Thank
said.
you. Obviously the district has put out its guidance, and again, we really do need everyone to comply so we can do our best to keep schools open and allow our kids to continue the in-person learning that they've been able to experience so far. And turn to that, Dr. Harrison, so you were starting to talk about the AM/PM.
We want to, Dr. Huff?
Yeah, I think we can release Dr. Huff. And again, Dr. Huff, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. And hopefully we won't be inviting you back, but we do appreciate your availability to address the medical questions as they arise.
Sure, thanks. Happy
Thank
Thanksgiving.
you.
Take care.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye.
So Dr. Harrison, when you were talking about the AM/PM model for Dow's Lane, looking at, talking about some of the data, and I think it'd be helpful if you could speak to a little bit in terms of the type of data that you're analyzing and what we could be expecting to hear down the road. Are you looking at, for example, is it Ames Web data? Is it like Fondas and Pinnell reading screening? Or is there other data, just so we could understand the type of analysis that's being done and what type of presentation we can look forward to?
Yeah, so I'll actually, rather than representing Ms. Ellis's work, I'd ask Mary to step in and respond to this question because she's been leading this work on behalf of the district. So Mary?
Sure, thank you. So the data that we're looking at so far is primarily Ames Web data, which is part of our benchmark screening that's done each fall. And that data is showing in the area of ELA that our students are performing very similarly to how they have done in the past 2 years. So what that tells us is that our students began the year with a similar level of skill that they have had in previous years with those particular skills. We're still looking at the Fondas and Pinnell data and comparing it to previous years. Right now, at first blush, it looks like it's very similar, that we have a very similar number of students who are meeting the benchmarks that we've established on that assessment as well. For math, what we've done is we've looked at the mid-module and end of module scores for our first math module. And what we're finding there, again, very similarly, is that in most of the questions, the students are performing as they have in past, with a very similar percentage receiving the scores that they have received over the last 2 years. So I'd want to say that any statistician would be very upset with me for doing this comparison because the tests were given under extremely different conditions, different cohorts, different tests. So, what is it good information to look at and consider and use that as one data point? Yes, but it only tells part of the story. One of the things that the teachers have said is that even though students are coming in with similar skills, they have needed to spend the first few weeks establishing classroom routines. We know that we needed to put a tremendous amount of focus and continue to put a tremendous amount of focus on students' social emotional learning. And teachers feel that from a calendar perspective, not necessarily a skill perspective, that they are behind where they would have been last year. And so they're looking at prioritizing standards and how they can compact the curriculum so that they're sure that students end the year with the most important and the most impactful learning for each course.
That's
Thank you.
all.
And Ms. Ellis, just to follow up on that, the Ames Web data and the other ELA data, is that all from, beginning of the year screening, so looking at where people started, or is it also looking at as the year has gone on and where students have progressed over the first 2 months?
So we're looking for AimsWeb. It's a benchmark screener. It's given at the beginning of the year. We do for the math, that was our math modules. So those will continue throughout the year. So we'll certainly be touching base as the year progresses on how students are doing with the math modules. And we'll also be looking to see if students are making the same kind of progress when we do our next round of benchmark screening with AimsWeb, as well as looking at progress on reading levels using the Fountas and Pinnell.
And approximately when would that next screening occur, just so we can understand in terms of, when more data would be available to continue our analysis and further the discussion?
So I believe that typically we'd be doing that in January. I'm going to need to confirm that with the principals and also see if, given what this school year is like, if we want to make any adjustments with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave?
I'd like to follow up. I have two. The first one is, should I follow up first or should I keep in the same track? We'll follow up first. I heard you say, if you could clarify, Mary, that what you were finding with the Fountas and Pinnell is that people are performing as they were prior to the pandemic. Is that what I heard? Prior to, like, the same as last year?
So what I'm saying is that the percentage of students who are meeting our expectations to be at this point at the beginning of the school year, the percentage of students meeting expectations is approximately the same.
Okay, that's great, clarifying, thank you. And the second question is, I want to go back to the AM, PM, and full day piece that you were talking about, Dr. Harrison, with a specific lens on students with disabilities and where the planning process is in regards to that specific cohort of students in terms of coming to school in a different way more frequently as per their needs.
Yeah, so currently, our students that are in a special class, and those parents would know who their children are, they are attending school 4 days a week. So we have considered to continue to look at, as we do all the other cohorts of students, whether that is traditional cohort A and B, whether you have an IEP 504, we're contemplating different opportunities to enhance attendance for everybody. But right now, essentially, it's those that have the greatest need, that are in special class, that will be attending 4 days per week.
Thank you.
Maura, I believe you had a question?
Yes, thank you. Well, both for Ms. Ellis or for Dr. Harrison, I'm not sure. I think perhaps Ms. Ellis mentioned that the teachers have identified certain skills that the kids may not have. I'm not sure I understood what that phrase meant, if the kids are performing at the appropriate levels right now. So can you just help me to parse that a little bit, please?
Sure, of course. So the benchmark screeners that we do and the Fountas and Pinnell assess certain skills, but not all skills and not all content. And especially with AIMSweb, it typically tests very discrete skills in the very early years, things like letter naming, letter sounds, the ability to then take those discrete skills and put them together to make sense out of text and actually read and comprehend is assessed more through a Fountas and Pinnell, but again, on a limited basis. So it gives you a limited amount of information that is useful. It's not everything. And especially in the area of mathematics, that's an area where there's the topics and the concepts there's so many and they're so broad that there's no simple screener that one can do in the beginning of the year that's going to cover everything. You know, I also think it's tremendously important for us to remember that our students had not been in school for 6 months, and a lot of the skills of just being in school were needed to be retaught and needed to be practiced.
Well, it is a practice to challenge them. A challenge to practice those skills at home too, because
Yeah.
I think some families don't know what they are. So, or try and imitate them, but aren't fully aware. So it's for
Yeah.
sure there's an element there that is difficult to replicate. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Aaron, did you have a question?
I do. Just sort of as a follow-up, when we're looking at where the kids are and that a similar percentage are not meeting expectations as in prior years, and as we know, it's a different cohort. They haven't been in school. Do we have a sense, how the kids, so sort of what David was talking about, how the kids that are on IEPs are doing relative to last year as well? Are they further behind than they normally would have been under this model, or do we not yet have that data? I don't know if we've broken out the data into those types of cohorts.
I haven't broken out the data by 504s and IEPs yet, and I'll be asking the teachers to do that.
Okay. And did you have a sense, just at the initial look at the data, are the kids that aren't meeting expectations, although it's the same percentage, is the level of skill even sort of lower than maybe what it's been in the prior year for that particular group of children that aren't meeting expectations? Is there a bigger gap to fill, I guess, is what I'm asking, for those kids not meeting expectations?
Got it. Great question. And one that I have not looked at it with that lens yet. So I have my homework.
Okay.
Okay.
Guess on the flip side, maybe some kids do better in this, right? Like some kids might do better in this model, some may do worse. And forgive me that my internet is choppy. But it's interesting. I'm surprised by that. I would have expected a different story, I think.
I actually had as well.
Okay.
It was lovely to see that
Yeah.
we do have a similar percentage of the cohort performing as past cohorts have. And I think it's a testament to our teachers and to our families that during
And the kids.
challenge,
right?
and yes, of course. And
It
again,
shows their resiliency, I think, more
Right.
so than we expect. So to your point, those soft skills may not quite be there, right? Like that group interaction and that type of thing, because they're not doing it as much. But it's interesting. So with that, I guess, being said, and we know, I guess, anecdotally, and we sort of touched on this the last time with the AMPM model, the hybrid model is so much more challenging for teachers, right? Because they're trying to teach remote and trying to teach to kids in the classroom.
Mhm.
With these outcomes, it makes me think maybe the teachers are being harder on themselves on some level, which is like a good problem to have, right? Like that they really want to do the.
We lost it.
Bad as maybe they might be feeling about this inadequate time that they're in different time that they're in. So again, to your point, that's a testament to the teachers that they're really trying to step up to make it all work. So given all of this now, and I've sort of said this, I think on the last call as well, is the focus then really on getting the kids back in school and knowing that we could be in a yellow zone or an orange zone and may have to be all remote? Or is it more on focusing now on that cohort of kids that aren't meeting expectations and how to get them there, especially if there is a bigger gap potentially, which we don't yet know? Is that more the focus than necessarily trying to get them in every day? Or I'm just curious because there's so much going on, right? Like
Right. So I don't see it as an either or, but as a both. You know, we've always been committed to any student that is not meeting benchmarks receiving services, and there's a very robust MTSS system in place to do that, a multi-tiered system of supports. You know, there's a group that looks at all the data, determines what students need. We have tremendous interventionists who are working with kids to fill in any gaps and get those skills up. We want kids in school because it's good for them and we love seeing them there, and we know that being in the same room with their teacher is going to result in the best learning possible. So it's both.
Thanks, Mary. And I'll stop asking questions now. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison, for those updates. I know you said you were pausing. I didn't know if there was more that you had to add or if that was it. So appreciate
Catching my breath and let others speak.
Appreciate the updates. So now we have our first community comment period. There'll also be another period after the presentation. So as always, I would suggest if you have questions related to tonight's presentation that you wait to ask those questions after the presentation, because I think it's more effective to have that dialogue and hear those comments after the presentation has been made. But that said, to the extent there are members of the community that like to make a comment at this point in time, if you please put your name and address in the Q&A in Zoom so you can be recognized. If we could promote Stephanie Fonseca, 25 Eiler Lane, please.
Good evening. Thank you all for spending this wonderful Tuesday evening doing this, and happy Thanksgiving in case I forget later. I really appreciate Mr. Friedman and Mr. Graber and Ms. Bernstein continuing to ask about the data that Ms. Ellis presented and is analyzing, or not presented, but is analyzing. If my understanding is correct, it seems that elementary students are behind in curriculum than they typically would be in a normal year. Could Ms. Ellis clarify if you are finding any difference between the AM/PM model for K1 and the hybrid model for 2-3? So in other words, are kids in the K1 model more or less behind where they typically would be than the second and third grade children in the hybrid model? And I have two other questions. I don't know if you just want me to run through them or if you want to answer.
Why don't you just run through your questions so you can so we can keep track of the allotted time, and then we'll answer them as time permits.
Yes, sir. Okay, so my second question is, could Dr. Harrison provide some additional information on the parent response by grade for the expansion of the AM/PM model? For example, what was the response rate by grade, and what was the yay versus nay for each grade? And then my final question/comment is, despite the AM/PM model not being expanded to second and third grade, will the administration continue to look into moving the specials out of the AM/PM model for K1? As I've noted ad nauseum since the second day of in-person learning back in September, our K and first grade students are having to sit through remote specials in the school building for 45 minutes each day that they are physically there. And as the administration has mentioned repeatedly, remote learning is essentially inferior to in-person learning. So I was wondering if perhaps the district is going to continue to look into making these specials actually virtual so that children can focus on core learning when they're in the building. You know, as I've noticed with the chart that I've sent you guys, the specials, whether virtual or not, currently are being given far too much class time versus math and literacy. So those are my 3 questions.
So,
Thank you.
Stephanie, I'll just, Brian, if you want to quickly,
Yeah,
I can
go ahead.
respond to some aspects of it. The pacing question is something that's being analyzed, and we're not able to provide a differential between KM1 and 2 and 3 at this point in time. But I think it's fair to say that in any school district that has experienced the closures that we have here in New York, we're going to see that students across the board are largely a little bit behind in the pacing from where they would have been this time last year. With respect to response
Dr.
rate,
Harrison, could I just jump in there for a second on that? I just want to clarify, it's not the students who are behind in that they have less skills. And Dr. Harrison phrased it accurately. It is the pacing of the instruction that we're not where we would have been. Acquisition of skills, we have not seen an impact.
I apologize. I'm using the wrong vocabulary. So yes, the pacing is what I'm referring to.
Okay, great.
with respect to the response rate of the data, and something that we will publish fully when we share the other data as well, but to work backwards, we received approximately 95% of the 3rd grade students, parents responded, and it was nearly a 50-50 split in the vote. 2nd grade data was a little bit skewed because we had some families where we had 2 votes for a singular household. So the data set that I'm looking at is looking at essentially 100% attendance, which we know I would have to go to another sheet to pull that apart, but we're looking at about 45% of the parents were supportive. In 2nd grade, we had 83% response rate and 60% supportive.
Dr. Harrison, I think you said 2nd grade again. Do you mean 1st grade?
I'm sorry, 1st grade, yes, correct. 1st grade, we had 83% response rate, 60% supportive, and kindergarten, 92% response rate with a 36% support. With respect to specials, when we spoke and presented regarding the expansion of the AM/PM attendance model to 2nd and 3rd grade, in that model, we would be able to deliver all specials remotely because of the structure that would change in the whole school shifting to a singular schedule. But as long as we have both models occurring at once, the K1 and 2-3 as they are today, it is not viable for us to be able to schedule it so that all the specials would be facilitated while children were learning from home, because it would not be possible for us to deliver preparatory periods for our teachers that are required contractually. So that would not be viable in that model. But if we were to make a shift to where all of our students were following the same schedule, i.e. AM/PM model, as we had presented a couple of weeks ago in the other forums, that would be a viable option for us.
Will you afford me one more question?
If it's very brief, since you're already over your time.
Oh, sorry. So my question is, maybe not my question, my observation, 36% of the kindergarten families that supported the AM/PM model, I just trying to find the nicest words to say what I'm trying to say. And it's a lot of families made this decision based purely on what works best for their schedule and their pods versus what works best for the entire K-3 school. And I hope you will take into consideration what the teachers are also asking for, because if we go 100% remote, we are now asking our 6, 7, and 8-year-old children to be on a computer for 28 hours a week. So I hope you will, despite this data, continue to look at the AM/PM model expansion, because I think it's more important than some people may have voted with. That's it. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jennifer Lipman, 56 Minor Pond Lane.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, thanks so much. I have one question and one comment. My question, which I'm actually not asking for myself, as we aren't planning to travel anywhere anytime soon, but on behalf of a friend, if you travel and you need to get the COVID test in the state that you're going to 3 days prior to your return to New York, how does that work if you go somewhere for 48 hours? Like if you're not in the other state for the full 3 days, how would you get that first test that's required for re-entry? So that's my question. My comment is that I was very pleased to hear that it's under consideration to go full-time in person for Dow's Lane, and I totally appreciate that there's a lot of logistical issues. I know that a number of other Westchester school districts are doing this for their elementary schools. And some of them are even in the process of moving their younger learners to full-time this month. I understood Dr. Harrison's concern that if the kids were in school full-time in person, that might make the school more vulnerable if there were a COVID case in terms of spread or, you know, a wider shutdown. I just wanted to note that I know anecdotally that both Armonk and Chappaqua are full-time in person for their elementary. I know Chappaqua is K through 8, and I think Armonk is K through 6, and that neither of them have had any shutdowns. They have both had the similar kinds of cases that Irvington has had, where, you know, one school class is quarantined based on one case. And I know Chappaqua had like an isolated pod that had to quarantine, but neither elementary school has had to shut down at all, despite having had cases. So I just don't think that should be a factor in whether or not we push for a full return to full-time school. I know that there's lots of other considerations, but I do think that if the PPE and precautions are in place, that we should still maintain these small group quarantines if there were to be a COVID case, the same as it is now. Thank you.
Thank you. And frankly, Jennifer, I don't have an answer to your first question. My recommendation would be to visit the Department of Health website. There's a number of email addresses. If you go to the link from our website for the travel guidance for New York State, there's, I believe, an email address on that page where the question can be submitted. So I certainly think you've identified one of the many loopholes that exist in this new state regulation.
Okay, I'll let her know.
Apologies.
She's putting her kids to bed, so I asked her on your behalf. Like I said, I'm not planning on going anywhere, but I'll refer her to the website.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So looks like that is all we have. So Dr. Harrison, back over to you for this evening's goals presentation.
Great, thank you. So bear with me for 1 second. All right. So good evening. As you'll recall, back in the beginning of the school year, we gave a brief overview associated with what our primary areas of focus will be for this school year. At that time, we said that we would certainly stop later in the year and delve into these goals a little more deeply. So tonight, we're going to take some time to do so. When we think of the goal structure in a school district, you have to think how annual district goals live within the hierarchy or the system in which we have our focus in the school district. So we have to step back and think about how we govern and how we lead. So overarching everything, of course, is a Board of Education and a policy manual. But when we think about the day-to-day work in the school district, we have a strategic plan, and that strategic plan has a series of ambitious objectives that we set out to achieve over time. Then from there, each and every year, we develop a series of goals on a district level, on a building level, on a department level, that really articulate how we're achieving those higher level goals. All of those goals are certainly aligned and always connected back to the strategic plan. When we think about all these goals, we focus in 6 key areas. We think about our strategic objectives that build from the strategic plan and really become the focal points for the work in our school district. As we build our plans, we constantly reference them as we go throughout the entire school year. We're always connecting back as to why we're doing something. We use these 6 objectives to really be able to ground the work that we lead each and every year. So when we think about this, they're all related. They're all connected to our mission for the district, our vision for where we're headed, and they all play an important role in the work that we do. There's a degree of interconnectivity that truly exists, that all the goals complement each other. Some may seem to stand alone at times based upon the particular focus, but if we take a second and we think about where we are today, certainly the fiscal health of the district, the focus that the board and the administration has placed on that over recent years has allowed us to be able to be in a position where we're able to navigate these difficult times that we're facing today. Our focus on social emotional learning is front and center in all that we do. When we think about providing our students with a rigorous, comprehensive, enriched learning experience, that is at the forefront of that which we do every single day. So when we think about this work, you can see how all 6 of these objectives are connected. So as we headed out into this school year, we know that there's a lot of things that we want to do. Each and every year, we always step back and think, gosh, there's so much that we want for our kids. We have a high level of ambition in thinking about that which we want to accomplish, that we want to do or believe we need to do to make our schools all they can be on behalf of our students. But really, we had a primary goal this year in ensuring the health and safety of every student and every staff member, that we're supporting their social emotional well-being, thinking about mental health here. As Mary had indicated before, when looking at the learning data across the district, we're finding in a lot of feedback from teachers that certainly the closure, the shift to emergency distance learning back in the spring affected that pacing of instruction. But as we got into this school year, yeah, we are moving at a little bit of a slower pace than maybe we have in the past. But some of it's for good reason, because we need to focus on the well-being of our students. We need to spend that extra time building community in an environment where we're all so disconnected. We need to make sure that we're also supporting our staff, and that Flex Wednesday is ever so important in thinking about the needs of our teachers, providing that opportunity for the very necessary collaboration and all the professional development that goes into addressing the learning needs, the instructional needs that are before us. And starting the year, it was important to make sure we focused on a successful reopening. And as evidence for our conversation before, keeping our schools open is of critical importance. And also that idea of finding opportunities and approaches to expanding student attendance and finding that opportunity to restore a degree of normalcy in our school environment. This sits at the foundation of all that we're doing this year. But despite that, we have numerous other goals that we're focusing on, goals that aren't going to make their way into a presentation tonight. We think about the low levels of details, the things that we focus on, the big picture items. We have a capital project that we're roaring ahead with right now. We have bids that are due within the next week or so. We're moving forward with that. We're looking at budget. Carol's developing long-range financial plans that are going to be updated next month. We're delving into our budget process and planning for the future. But when we think about our work this year, we're really focused in 3 key areas. The first really links back to what we were talking about before in developing a well-articulated, well-aligned K-12 SEL social emotional learning plan. Second goal, in focusing on developing a welcoming school community with a specific focus on equity, inclusion, diversity, and of course, our BIPOC population. And then a focus on assessment, which is so critical and important in this day and age. When we look at teachers teaching differently, teachers need to provide different levels of feedback. They need to assess kids differently. And as Mary has demonstrated before, we have to start to look at data in different ways. You know, as a district, it was a step that we've been taking. And really, you can see from the conversation that Mary was leading and the conversation that we'll have this evening, that it is advancing, and it's doing so in a different way. So we have to be really focused on this work and understand that that flex time on Wednesday is key to make sure that we can support all three of these areas. All three of these areas need time for professional learning. All three of these areas need time for collaboration and review of data, reflection on practice, and planning for future experiences. So tonight, Mary's going to delve into the work that we're planning and have planned for SEL across the district. And then I will talk about our work on diversity and inclusion. And then Mary will come back to you and you can give us an update on the work that we're leading in the area of assessment.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So our first goal in the area of social emotional learning, the outcome that we have set for ourselves is the development of a well-articulated, aligned K-12 social emotional learning plan. I want to start by saying that this goal in no way indicates that we are not doing social emotional learning in our schools. We absolutely are. Each school has programs in place that have been in place and continue to be worked on and are happening every single day. What we don't yet have is that K-12 look to make sure that the things that are being done at each level are articulated vertically with each other, and that they're all aligned, that they aren't living as isolated programs. So one of the major challenges that we're going to have in developing this plan is honoring the tremendous work that has happened while bringing everyone together to form a cohesive approach. So we've turned to CASEL to support us with that. They are leaders in the area of social emotional learning. As many of you know, CASEL came to the district last year. A representative was here for 2 days and visited classrooms, interviewed all different stakeholders, and presented a report for us on where we were at that moment in time. And one of their major recommendations, while honoring and celebrating all the work that has been done, was to get that cohesive look and that K-12 alignment. So we've begun with some professional learning for our administrative team. We've had part of our administrative retreat this summer was spent with CASEL, developing our own understanding and developing a common language around social emotional learning. Part of our administrative council meetings have also been with CASEL. So we're really focusing first on our administrative team as the leaders of the work. We are in the process of recruiting a group to be on a district-wide SEL committee. We've got wide number of people who are interested, representing many different stakeholders, and we'll be sending out final details about who's on that committee shortly. We will also be reaching out for community representation for that. Then our next step is more professional learning for the district staff. Again, you'll see that our primary focus this year is really on developing the capacity of the adults in our organization to lead the work in developing this cohesive plan. So we will have a series of meetings for our SEL committee in which we'll dig into some of the research about SEL. Some of that will be facilitated again by CASEL. So CASEL will also then work with our committee on developing an actual plan, a document that will guide our work moving forward, that will take all of the wonderful work that's already going on in the district and ensure that that's aligned. We're looking to implement that plan next year. And next year, then the next step in the multi-year implementation of social emotional learning will be shifting our focus into the work that is done in educating the children in our school district in social emotional learning. And I again want to stress, we're not waiting until next year for that to start. It's already going on. It's a matter of alignment and creating a cohesive program. And this is the CASTLE framework. This has been recently updated to indicate their renewed focus on equity. So the 5 center competencies are the same, the 5 competencies for social and emotional learning. And then the circles outward indicate where this work occurs. Whoop.
Sorry.
That's okay. There we are. So first in our classrooms, then going out into our schools, families, caregivers, and communities. And then you'll see on the bottom that we're looking at SEL instruction and classroom climate. And then the next one, which is going to link very closely to what Dr. Harrison is going to talk about next, school-wide culture, our practice, our policies, creating truly authentic partnerships with our community, and aligning the learning opportunities for everyone in our organization around SEL.
Yeah, so thank you, Mary. So when we think about that, it really kind of leads to that question of who we want to be as a community, who we want our children to be, the value that we place on the role that every member of our school community plays. Going back to this spring and summer, we certainly saw challenges that existed in the community, across the country, and really critical conversation ensued related to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And as a result of that, I certainly committed to take a deep look at this work outside of the SEL wheel, but recognizing the alignment that takes place. So here we partnered with NYU, and in doing so, we've been doing some really critical work and launching a plan that's going to be comprehensive. And much like the work that Mary highlighted for SEL and with CASTLE, this is going to lead to a multi-year plan. So we look at what our goals and objectives are related to this. We had our initial community conversation back in July. And as you saw from my communications, next Tuesday, we have a follow-up where we're going to present with NYU a deep dive into this work that we're going to be engaging in during the course of the school year. Like with the SEL initiative, we are going to be forming 2 different committees that are going to play critical roles in this work. The first is going to be lead learners, folks that are going to participate in ongoing extensive professional development and really be folks that are going to be leaders in this work in our school district. We are also going to perform a root cause analysis. So when we go back to that CASTLE wheel and we think about our policies, when we think about our practices, a root cause analysis is a process by which we dig into those areas. We take a look at the systems that guide that which we do here in the school district. And by delving into it as we do, we're going to find opportunities for improvement. We're going to review data that's going to look at access, that's going to look at student success and achievement, and we're going to find opportunities to make sure that there's improvement and that there's equity for all of our students, that we want to make sure that we have the diversity in our curriculum and our staff that we're looking for. We want to look at our programs of study to see whether or not we want to or need to offer other areas for our students to explore, or how we need to integrate other opportunities or other resources or teachings into existing curricula. When we think about how we do this in our schools, much like we said with SEL, there needs to be a focus on professional learning. So not only are we going to have that targeted effort for lead learners, we're going to have ongoing professional development that's going to take place in our schools, with NYU working directly with our faculty and staff on culturally responsive, sustaining education. So here, NYU is going to be, again, working directly with our staff in each of our schools, just like they did our secondary schools back in the spring. We are going to engage in that lead learner training, the root cause analysis process. And at the end of the year, we are going to be looking for the development and the launching of a multi-year strategic plan that's going to focus on this critical topic. So when we think about what this work looks like, we've provided, I'm sorry here, folks. It's very glitchy tonight. That we provided an overview of the type of work that you see. A lot of this work that I referenced already. On Tuesday night, a week from tonight, we're going to delve deeply into this, and our partners at NYU are going to provide examples of this work. But what's really critically important is that this is a community effort. We're leading this work within the Irvington schools, appropriately so, but we couldn't do this without the partnership of the community. We know that the IEF, the IFA, and the PTSA have generously funded a large portion of this partnership with NYU. But when we think about this, we also have to acknowledge that we need community participation. So when we think about the lead learner work, there's going to be an opportunity for some community members to join us in that process. So NYU has a very structured model that we'll talk about next week, that we're going to look at inviting some community members to participate in that process, to join us in that learning. When we think about the root cause analysis, again, there's going to be an opportunity for community participation. The NYU model provides for 3 community members to participate in the CRSE lead learning training, and then 6 community members to participate on the root cause analysis team. So when we think of that, I want to be clear that it's not necessarily 9 people, because by design, there's overlap between those 2 teams or those 2 committees, because they believe that we need to have the lead learners' involvement participating in that root cause analysis work. But what's going to be interesting is that we know our community partners are seeking to lead some parallel efforts in our community that are going to grow out of this work. So when we are sitting at home, when we think about your commitment to this, when we think about your passion for leading this kind of change along with us, please don't be disappointed in thinking that he's only going to have 9 people or they're only going to be able to engage 9 parents. Trust that there's going to be more opportunity, because we want this to be a community-wide effort, and that we believe for this change to be sustained, this change to be understood, that it has to be broader than a couple committees and schools. It has to be multi-year commitment, and it needs more than just school staff members involved. So please trust that this process is going to grow with our wonderful partners in the Diversity Inclusion Committee. Mayor? Ms. Ellis, are you there?
I'm sorry, I was muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. So assessment has been a focus for, I'm going to say in most schools, probably on and off forever. It is always something that educators are looking at. Last year, assessment was seen as a focus of the instructional leaders, which is the group formed by our district office leadership, our building leadership, and then all of our department and grade level representatives. So in the area of assessment, there's many, many things that we want to look at and had chose to look at last year just before COVID hit. And we've seen with moving into a hybrid and distance learning model, the need to really up our game with assessment has become even more important. So the outcome that's been established for this goal is a district-wide focus on measuring student growth and success, program effectiveness, and the use of data to inform instruction. And some of the activities that will be going on in that area is we have already begun holding professional development for our staff in areas of instruction and assessment, and particularly in providing feedback. You know, research tells us that providing feedback to students midway through learning, as opposed to a grade at the end of learning, is what actually has the most impact We had a meeting last week with Diane Cunningham, who's a leader in this area, with our instructional leadership team to talk about how we might be looking at feedback in a hybrid environment. So our instructional leaders were looking at that, and they will continue to look at that. We're going to be, as a group, digging into some of the research, some of the professional writing about feedback, and then that work will go back to the departments and the grade levels. Our schools and department levels are also focusing on reviewing and making revisions to our current assessments. A lot of the assessments that teachers typically give, they're finding are challenging in this environment, to have some students at home, some students in school. And so looking at ways to structure opportunities for students to show us what they know, what they understand, and what they can do in new ways that makes sense in this environment is an area of focus. We currently have a data plan that describes the data that is gathered in the district and how it's used. And in conjunction with the administrators and board members on committees, we're looking at that data plan and looking to expand the information that is in it so that it's more robust and gives a little bit more information about how our data is gathered, where it's kept, who uses it, and how they use it, what they use it for. And then one thing that was in discussion again last year before COVID hit, we know that we were looking at processes at the secondary school to look at schedules, to look at start times, and also to look at the honors placement process, which is where the connection to assessment comes in. We want the community to know that those topics are still being discussed. They're still on the table, and we will be producing a plan and a timeline for returning to look at those topics and invite community participation in that.
So when we think about these objectives, it's work that we're committed to, really at our core. It's embedded in everything that we're doing. We've made commitments. We've built schedules throughout the school year related to these commitments. As Mary and I both highlighted, we have key partners that are supporting this work. The top experts in thinking of Castle, NYU Metro Center, Diane Cunningham, IDE, outstanding partners to really guide this work, to enrich our thinking and our planning. But we recognize we're also living in a world where school operations, when we think about overall health, is really fragile right now. And we have to recognize that any given day we could pivot and change. You think about where this meeting started and talk about testing in a yellow zone. You think about the fear of going into an orange zone or a red zone, and all that affects what we do in our schools. It affects our access to teachers and opportunity to engage around this work. So we need to continue to be flexible. We need to continue to be focused, but also recognize that there might be some life happening here and things that are going to impact these plans a little bit. We have to make sure we're focused on the well-being of our students, providing a sound program and experience for all of our students. That is always going to be our first priority. So we need to recognize that we have to constantly reassess and evaluate the direction that we're going. When you think about the work that we're doing right now, it's important work, but it's time-consuming work. It's work that includes participation from so many people. And as was recognized before in comments, I think it was from Mrs. Bernstein, that our teachers are really stressed. Our teachers are doing an incredible job. Our administrators, all of our staff are doing an amazing job. But they need time to focus on their planning. They need time to focus on their instruction. And the last thing that we want to do right now, especially when our children have such limited opportunities to be with their teachers in person, is to pull teachers out of the classroom too often. There's going to have to be some opportunities there where we do have some of that work. But I can tell you, this is where we're going to take advantage of those Flex Wednesdays. We've scheduled as many of these activities as possible for Flex Wednesdays. We're going to look at superintendent conference time, and we may add another superintendent's conference day or two to our calendar to try to accomplish this work. We're looking at a date in January now, and communication will come out regarding that in the next month. But we're looking at opportunities to not have a negative impact on our students' experiences, but making sure we're staying true to this commitment or these commitments throughout the school year. So as we think about where we are, there's going to be lots of opportunities for updates. There's going to be communication that's going to occur on an ongoing basis through my weekly newsletter, through meetings such as this, through other opportunities for public engagement. You saw my letter today. I hope you consider joining us next Tuesday for that next step in our diversity and equity work. When there's a call for committee membership, whether it's a school-based committee or one of our partner organizations in the community that's forming a committee to do some of this work, I hope you reach out and participate in it. So this is exciting work. It's important work. It's hard work, but it's work that's going to make our schools better. It's going to make us better educators, and it's going to result in progress for our students. As I always say, I'm always committed to every student and every staff member each and every day, and that I look forward to the impacts that this work is going to have on our children and our school community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison.
My pleasure.
David?
Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation. I have a couple of questions, if I might. And, I have two questions, comments, right? So let's see. Can you put the presentation up again? Actually, it doesn't necessarily matter. In the slide where you talked about culturally responsive curriculum and the social emotional piece of the goal setting, I just wanted to talk a little bit about and ask the question of what does it mean for our school communities' access to more diverse materials, curricularly speaking, right? When we start, I know we're talking about in the beginning, but is there sort of that work going to be integrated into the work around diversity and inclusion in terms of not just the community members and people, but the types of access students have to a more diverse collection of materials?
Yeah. So I would say that's gonna be multifaceted. So I think when we think about the CRSE work that's going to be happening, that we have a date in January that we've scheduled for all of our schools with NYU, that there's going to be insight and engagement around that concept. And I would have to be honest, there's been a lot of work that's been happening in the schools, like Mary indicated, related to SEL. There's lots of efforts that have been happening over recent years. But I think that is going to provide opportunity for reflection and some guidance in that area. But notably, when we think about a root cause analysis, that work is going to dig into all different tiers of the district. So, the work that we're doing, like right now, I can say at the high school, Juliet and Matt are doing awesome work with our chairs, looking at all the data in and around our honors placement process and looking at how that's connected to kids in different demographics. So whether it is rated the socioeconomics, race, and the track that kids follow in our high school and the number of honors classes or advanced classes that they're able to attain in their experience. We're going to be looking at curriculum. There's conversations not only around at the secondary level in the high school, the possibility is of adding courses of study, but that idea of looking at the content that we teach, how we teach it, thinking about implicit bias in our own thinking and our instruction, and the resources that we utilize. So that's all going to be linked into most directly into the root cause analysis work.
Awesome.
And growing out of that will be recommendations for enhancements that will take years to get there, but the needs will be identified in that process.
Awesome, thank you. And then my second point is on the question / comment is on the assessment goal. First, before I actually ask the question, I just wanted to add on top of the, and I think you qualify it well as it's very time-consuming work. It's very rigorous work, but I wanted to add just from an additional professional lens that it is the work, and it is, when I say it is the work with capital the, when we talk about testing, PCRs and up the nose and all these different things, and that kind of testing, that testing is important right now. When we talk about these goals, and that goal in particular is the work on how we measure the growth of our students over time. I can't stress enough how psyched I am that we're finally putting the whole foot in the water, to make a sort of old joke. It's very exciting, so I'm glad that it's reached the place where it is. And I also wanted to point out that I thought that the connection to the data plan piece, how that work goes hand in hand, and how you qualified that information was an awesome step forward for this work as well for us as a district. And I guess I wanted to ask was like, how does this work ultimately, down the road, not now, not in an urgent sense, but just in a big picture, how does it affect the grading policy and a move away from the kind of recall testing in, Regents classes and things like that? Like, how does this work affect that? How parents view their students' grades and see them moving forward. I mean, that may be a complex question, but you don't have to dig too deep into it. The idea of.
I think, first of all, you look at it on a micro and a macro level, right? So when we think about the value of assessment and the need for assessment and feedback, you think about the moment in time, right, around teaching and learning and the concepts that are being taught and learned at a given time. And as a student is assessed and as feedback is given, it's the opportunity to not only improve the instruction and the student learning at that period, but it's also looking at our curriculum and thinking about what we're doing from a teaching standpoint. So when we take a look at, and we could say like a math assessment, that you can go through and look at item analyses and look at literally common assessments, question by question, skill by skill that it's measuring. And then you can look at the pacing of your curriculum. And if we find areas where we have 95% of our students knocking it out of the park, but we're spending a week teaching that, and then we have an area where only 60% of our students are mastering a content or a skill, and we're taking 2 days to teach that, well, what does that tell us about our priorities in the time that we dedicate to teaching? So when you think about curriculum, those are the types of adjustments that you make bigger picture. And our teachers are engaging in that level of work. When we think about, I think, some of the connection that comes back to the conversation around honors, it makes me think about how I introduced the slides related to equity and diversity. Who do we want to be, right? So we want to think, do we want to be a district that teaches a Regents curriculum? Or do we want to make sure our students hit the New York State requirements to get a Regents diploma, but we want to have the world of opportunity? We always talk about how proud we are here in Irvington of the huge number of offerings that we have for a small high school. But do we want students to be hindered by just the Regents exams? We have so many amazing teachers, creative teachers. We have kids that want to learn it. So if we think about how we can break some of those boundaries down in and around course selection for kids, opening the doors for more opportunities, I think there you begin to broaden horizons. You make the whole experience richer for more students at the high school. So I think we're going to see not the review of data associated, whether it's through the work that's being led at the high school around courses or the work that's going to grow out of the root cause analysis. It's going to provide a ton of opportunity for us to really reflect on who we want to be, the types of experiences we want our kids to have, and what those pathways may look like all the way through the high school. And that conversation might be starting in the high school, but when you think about that, that trickles all the way down. If you change your thinking about what you want that profile of an Irvington High School student to be, well, that's an end product, but it starts in kindergarten. So we can start to change the structures of how kids take classes, how kids opt into classes or are selected or accepted into classes. But as we look at that, is going to have impacts all the way down. So when we think about that last goal that was listed for assessment, we have school start times there, we have school schedules there, and we have honors there. Because how I look at it, all of them link together. So it's going to be one broader initiative that we're going to map out, but it's going to involve community members from all levels at different times, because all those things are linked together.
Thank you.
Well,
And Dr. I just wanted to pick up on something you were talking about because I know it's a conversation that we've had on and off over several years about the regents and how many regents we want to offer in Irvington. So, I like how you were bringing it back to that. I, don't want us to lose sight of that conversation that we've had in fits and spurts, but I do think maybe have a home after some more of this work is done, because I do think that's a excellent area to dig into in terms of how many regions we want to offer and why we may want to offer fewer regions to then allow for a more differentiated curriculum, just something that's different and not, geared solely to making sure we hit the standards that are going to be tested by the regions at the end of the year.
Yeah. You know what? Who do we want to shape the vision for what our high school is? Is it an archaic regents model? We understand we have to have standards for our kids to meet, to be able to graduate. But at the end of the day, let's set what that vision is, and let's take some of those real artificial boundaries off of our course offerings and look for the opportunities to expand them.
Thank you. I have some other stuff, but I'll let the other trustees go first. I just wanted to seize on that before we transitioned on. So, Beth?
Okay, great. So I kind of want to just remind anyone who's watching or the other trustees that we also have different pathways to graduation that are being discussed on the statewide level. So when we're talking about making decisions about regents, it's not like we're making them in the vacuum of IUFSD, right? We have a big statewide conversation going on at this time.
Yeah.
And I did want to ask a question though. So when we talk about honors, that's another conversation that's been going on for some time, and it even arose in the community conversation on diversity and inclusion that we had in July. There were a lot of questions about that. And I just wanted to ask, operationally, we're talking about it here in the boardroom as a high school inquiry, but there's also the transition from 8th to 9th grade, from IMS to IHS, which includes placement processes for honors classes in 9th grade. So I was wondering if there was anything you wanted to, not that you wanted to, if there's anything you could do to help me understand better how that process can include both schools, how that
Well,
works.
how I look at it, any initiative that we have that's going to relate, and again, we're looking at building a comprehensive process.
Yeah,
This work, we have a lot of other work, right? We outlined 3 key goals, and I don't want this to be the focus of the work, but we are going to build a process this year that's going to guide our future work. And when we think about the areas of scheduling, I believe that when we take a new look at scheduling, we got to take a look at our schools as 2 related entities. We share facilities. The schools are on the same grounds. We share staffing. For most parts, they share a schedule, right? So we need to look at scheduling in that way. And when we think of course placement processes and an evaluation of that, that has to start as our students are entering high school. It makes you think about, as we look at the whole world of it, it's not just an IHS high school conversation, it becomes also an IMS conversation because of the role that our curriculum and our teachers and our practices and policies lead into that. But then it starts making you think, well, if we're thinking about that, well, we have a math placement process, right? As our kids enter the middle school. Do we reconsider that? And how does that play out? And then all of a sudden, we're thinking, now we're affecting Main Street School. So it just shows the linkage of all this work. So it has to be a holistic review. There's going to have to be a focus that's going to connect on these different topics and follow the threads through our schools, whether it's a web that goes out or it's something that's woven vertically or horizontally. We got to follow the path to the goal.
that's a helpful gloss on it, to bring particularly the part about the backwards impact as you go through from secondary school not chapters, grades. I did want to ask now, I don't know if I misheard this, between Mary Alice and yourself. So it seems like for the SEL committees, at least my understanding is those are mostly staff related, because there's a lot of instructional aspects to that and the work that's done in the schools. And as we talk about the equity, diversity, and inclusion piece, we talk about more community involvement, including the CRSE and the root analysis that you discussed. But I was wondering where there's room for student involvement and how that's expected to take place. I would think that NYU thinks about that, and so does the district.
So Mary, do you want to jump in?
Sure. In terms of SEL, the committee, it's interesting, a lot of people think about SEL as being focused on the teachers, and specifically on the teachers that work in related services like our school psychologists, our social workers. And looking at the CASTLE model, it is really an educational community model. So while we're looking for social workers and psychologists and teachers and principals, we're also looking for parents and some of our clerical staff, our custodial staff, because it's not only about what is taught in a classroom, it's about the way that we live together and the way we all consider our community and how we behave within that community. So that SEL group is much, much broader. In terms of students, at this point in time, we are not looking for students to be part of developing the plan, but I would certainly see students as being integral in terms of what it looks like within the building. But it's a really interesting idea. We may want to think about either at the building level or at the district committee level, bringing in some of our secondary students. So I love the idea. I will talk with the CASTLE people about it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And it's also interesting because we know that when we talk about anti-racism work, we do often talk about educating everybody in the entire community at the school level. So I hadn't thought about that with the SEL, so thank you very much. And is there a plan with NYU to include students in the processes in any of the early conversations, or will that happen more maybe through clubs or something?
There'll be opportunities through root cause analysis process. I believe there's some student engagement that will happen then. And then there'll be outgrowths of this work similar to the SEL process. I can say that just the pure initiative of our students and our staff has already inspired lots of local effort. So there's some wonderful collaboration going on with our high school students in formation of a new club. There's been conversation among students and teachers about courses. So there's that level of engagement that is happening, but we're looking to formalize some of these processes, whether associated directly with the SEL partnership or NYU partnership, or other parallel local efforts that are happening in each of the schools.
Thank you for that. And I just want to say thank you also for continuing this work. I know that we're very concentrated on how the pandemic has changed our way of instructing and working, but we need always to be looking forward to the fact that we will eventually get through this, and we want to make sure that we're ready to really progress. And I think this work really is going to lay that foundation. So thank you to everyone who's working on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can't tell if any of the trustees who are remote have questions. Jane, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation, and a lot of professional learning and professional development going on. That's really, really exciting. And the importance of the Flex Wednesdays, so you don't have to pull the teachers out of the classroom and away from their students. So I just think it's really exciting that all that's going on. It's very important as an educator for the staff to continue their professional learning, and thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And I just maybe to piggyback your comments, I really want to give accolades to our staff, because not only are we dealing with all the challenges and navigating a pandemic, the balance between their professional and their personal lives and all the challenges that may be there, but these are numerous members of our team. I just don't want to say teachers, because as Mary indicated, there's representatives from all different segments of the district that are participating in this work. And these are all people that are seeking to step forward and do more for our district and do more for our children. So again, they are superstars and heroes, and in the spirit of Thanksgiving, certainly grateful for all that they're doing and the extra responsibility that they're taking on and dedication with this work.
Thank you. Maura, go ahead.
Thank you. So I also greatly appreciate the information on all of these goals, but I'm going to focus my questions tonight on the assessment piece, just to look at or clarify what we might be looking at hearing later in the year. And I apologize if I didn't understand when Mary was talking about this, but it sounds like we can expect a few updates in the year related to assessment. So at what point do we expect to see the assessments or the assessment process in the hybrid or remote model from the third bullet down? And is that sort of looking at how trying to change the assessment process to adjust to this year, or is that more of results of that process? Is the question I'm asking clear?
I think so. So I'm going to go back to David's comment when he said, this is the work. And that was very, very telling. And in many ways, I agree with David on that. And I think that because it is the work and it is ongoing, that we are already seeing shifts in assessments. I know in my speaking with the instructional coaches that teachers at all levels have needed to devise different ways to do those quick checks for understanding during instruction. It's very different now. They need to use Jamboard and all different kinds of technology to find ways to have students quickly let them know where they are in their learning. So I want to stress that assessment is not something, again, that happens at the end of learning. It's something that happens all the way through, and hopefully many times within a given lesson. You know, one of the things we've learned about teaching in a hybrid and a distance model is that the attention span, that the focus that someone can give in an online environment is much briefer than it is in an in-person environment. And so teachers are needing to, we've switched from mini lessons to micro lessons, and figuring out ways once you've done your micro lesson to check and see what was the impact of that instruction. What have students learned? Can I move on? Do I need to redo something? So there's all sorts of those formative assessments along the way that are already have undergone tremendous shifts. And then our teachers also recognize, and especially at the secondary where, you know, David mentioned, I think it was David, who mentioned assessments that are primarily recall. You know, in a classroom setting, having students sit at a desk and answer questions is a very manageable thing. It's not so manageable in this setting. And so teachers are looking for more student-driven, more creative, more out-of-the-box ways for students to show what they understand and what they can do. So it's really an ongoing process. And my hope is that when we reach, you know, near the end of the year, that we'll be able to come to you with some examples and say, last year an assessment in this course might have looked like this. This year it's going to look like this. That's my hope.
Thank you. So that's something that will kind of grow as the year goes on, and we will wait to hear an update when it's ready, because I know that is sounds like a considerable amount of work, and not having that prior year's model to depend on, not having last year's state testing. I mean, it's a reinvention for sure.
It's a tremendous amount of work. Yeah. And I also want to say it's never done. So whatever I bring to you will be where we are at that moment in the ongoing process of looking at assessment.
Thank you. The other piece that I wanted to highlight, and I know that this is one of those subjects which has have been of ongoing concern and interest at the high school level, is and which you and Dr. Harrison talked about, was the secondary school and honors placement scheduling. So we're looking for, by the end of the year, a timeline which would be public and which will then give the opportunity for community participation, meaning that that is where the process begins.
Correct.
Yes?
We're looking
That-
for at the end of this year is the articulation of the process.
I see. So the decisions get made in the coming school year as to how the secondary school schedule and these other structures, which are critical, right, to I guess to the sort of student that we want to create. So we want to kind of move from that, what are we looking to, who are we looking to have at the end of this process, and kind of work backward, if I can reiterate badly what was said previously.
Yeah, that's accurate. So this would be, this spring will take time to plan a well thought out process, which we will articulate at the end of the year. And the plan itself would commence with the 21-22 school year.
Well, I hope, despite the fact that we may not have so many middle or high school families on this call tonight, that we'll continue to put the word out about what can be expected as far as, what to expect as the year ends, so that everyone will be on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Thank you.
Michael?
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. A lot of great strategic thinking going on, and I appreciate everyone's efforts, including, as we're speaking about early, just the efforts of our faculty and our staff. Just to pick up where Maura left off, there have been some benefits that have come from adjustments made in response to COVID. And, so on the one hand, I missed the presentation by the athletic director last week, unfortunately, but I've been missing, seeing some of our other district leaders, our principals, our directors. And so, but one thing that has happened is that at different points in August, September, we had principals and others leading conversations with their school communities. And so when we talk about trying to engage those families and in those learning communities, maybe that's something we could think about when we get to the spring, and how we communicate the work that has been occurring in each of those schools. Because I think parents tend to see, as well as faculty, the work through the lens of the school buildings that they're engaged in. And I think what we've experienced in the past as a board is trying to condense that into one meeting is very challenging. But maybe at a school building by school building basis for the larger school community, we've seen that we can get great engagement and can really dive in and also, have, that great questions from the community. So I just suggest thinking about that as you think about how to communicate out the work when we get later in the year. Another, again, this is, a great meeting in the sense of we're thinking strategically, even in the midst of a crisis. And I think that's a case every year for us, that, we have our best laid plans, and then there are always things that come up. And I'm getting a little worried because each year the things that come up are greater and greater challenges, but I'm so proud of you continuing to push through and deal with the immediate issues at hand, as well as thinking about how we progress forward as a learning community. With that being said, I'm trying to sort of in my head think about how these different strategic initiatives work together. You referenced at the outset a strategic plan that guides this work. And then we have, and that was done last 5 years ago. So I'm wondering about how we roll into thinking about the next number of years forward. And it seems like we are in good shape in the sense that we have these initiatives themselves, which sort of guide what our vision may be going forward with the SEL work and with the equity work and the assessment work. But in that, there are ways in which we reach out to our community in terms of this root cause analysis. There was these committees. In the past, when we did the strategic planning, we had committees and surveys. And, you know, I'm glad to see even the, with the assessment work, the focus on feedback, which I would say, you know, was supported by the district survey that we did in prior years. So I'm not sure how all of those come together going forward, because, you know, for example, do we anticipate, I know we have, you know, money set aside, are we anticipating doing the district survey? Is that the same or different? How is that the same or different than the root cause analysis work, the SEL work, the, you know, planning for a sort of overall strategic planning process? Has there been some thinking about trying to make all of those different pieces work or how they interact?
Yeah, so I think we mentioned a bunch of different things there, Michael, and I think you shared some good thinking. You know, I too like to look for the silver lining and everything, and I think there's going to be some good that comes out of our experiences, right? We're going to learn how we can manage certain things differently. We're going to have navigated challenges and walk away from it with some new strategies and new sets of skills that are going to help us as a school community. When we think of the timeliness of our work related to SEL and diversity, partnerships with Castle and NYU respectively, that I believe that we go through this process and then we look at the outgrowth of those processes, and it presents then really an exciting opportunity to explore the renewal of our strategic plan, because we're going to have bodies of work that are going to grow out of that. We're going to have newfound priorities that are going to grow out of that. We're going to have a plan at the end of this year looking at structures and systems of how our schools operate. And here I'm referencing the idea of schedules, start times, honors processes. So we're going to have a whole bunch of plans that are going to be developed, and we're going to need to align them. Where I think the idea of community engagement plays a critical role is going to come back to looking at where those priorities lie for our community, getting feedback from our staff, our students, and our parents, and helping us prioritize. And I think we have the opportunity to now take those three discrete yet connected bodies of work, align them, take a reflection and then assess what we've done with the plan that we developed 5 years ago, see what we need to keep focusing on there, see what new initiatives there are, and use that as a foundation to facilitate the development of a new plan or a renewal or update of our existing plan. To me, it sounds kind of exciting to think about it, because we're envisioning something for the future. And we're able to, at the same time, to celebrate all the good work that we've done over recent years. The survey plays a role in that. I think the survey is a separate piece that, from the root cause analysis, I think it's another unique data set that we look to continue. I'll say that we had developed and we had a representative committee that had staff, administrators, board members, parents, students on it, where we met back in February, and we were planning to launch our survey in the spring, and guess what? School closed. So I have negotiated, and because we made a commitment and had a contract with K-12 Insight, the survey facilitator research team that we've worked with the last few years. I've negotiated and had our contract extended through June of 2022. So the monies that we spent and invested in the development of that survey that is still good for us to be able to develop a survey through the next year and a half. So we may choose that we want to do something in the spring of this year, but if we want to wait and collect that true data set once we return to some degree of normalcy, and to make that connection with what the data that we collected the past, I should say the past 2 years, two of the last 3 years, we'll have the opportunity to do that. So all this is going to come together. There's certainly going to be community engagement through dialogue, through participation in the processes, but certainly feedback through surveys. And some of it will be unique to those processes. And then there'll be the more holistic work that'll be associated with the school quality survey, which will be feedback driven on the experiences that students have in our schools. But it also, as you know, presents that opportunity for feedback on broader initiatives and priorities for the school community.
Great, thank you. And I just had one other question, and it actually is more small ball related to the prior set of questions coming out of, looking at Dow's Lane and other operations during COVID. One other piece that was discussed in the spring and summer was the opportunity for outdoor learning, and I believe the district looked at the ability, the possibility of implementing Wi-Fi to make it available outdoors at our different schools. Is that something that's still on the table? I think you had gotten a price for it. And I gotta say, based on everything we're seeing, the ability to have that flexibility outdoors seems like something that could be a benefit to the district.
I'm gonna ask Ms. Stein to respond because we've missed hearing her wonderful voice tonight.
So we
Your computer's on.
it's not.
Yeah.
It's on. Okay, that's it. It's on. It's on. Okay, so I don't know what I think he understands. It's on. Okay. So basically, we have tested the Wi-Fi outdoors. I'm sorry about the computer issues. And we've also tested using hotspots. So we've done a variety of different things. We're still not really able to do it very well. And so there's more work to do. But Michael, we are looking into that heavily. And there's an expense to it, but there's also just a technical limitation right now. But thank you. We'll keep looking into it.
Yeah, and we've had, I would say, Jay Stromwasser, the man behind the curtain of our meetings, has already acquired quotations for the expansion at the campus. And we can certainly look to expand that and get quotations for the other schools as well. So we definitely have the back pocket information for the campus. And I want to say it was, and Jay, you could reveal yourself, it was, I want to say, roughly $50,000 for the campus. And we have to work on the other quotations.
Correct. It was about 50,000.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison and Ms. Ellis, for that presentation. I think I don't want to take up too much time, but at least on the assessment piece, obviously this is something that we've been talking about at the, in our meetings now for as long as I've been on the board. I think, we've used the phrase at one point, we were dipping our toe in the water, and we've had, I think now we're starting to actually get into the water, which is good.
We're high diving.
What? We hang out too much. I know what you're going to say. I was just preempting it. And I also appreciate the use of SMART goals and the idea that we have benchmarks to look forward to, recognizing that circumstances may force us to alter some of those. But again, as we've said, the strategic work, the strategic thinking needs to keep moving forward. I just wanted to clarify, my understanding is, just for people who are looking there, the assessment piece isn't obviously just focused on in the hybrid model, it's also looking at assessment more broadly and changing how we assess going forward. So, I mean, that's my understanding. You'll correct me if I'm wrong.
As Dave, as Mary did, I'll reference Dave's comments, assessment's everything that you do. And so it's going to constantly evolve. Right now, the focus needs to be how we assess differently in this environment. And then the focus will always continue on how to get the best understanding of student growth and student success. So it's going to be a constant process. It's going to be always evolving from year to year. But as you can see, the focus right now is extremely targeted. We've narrowed the work that we're going to do. We're going to be able to document those efforts, and we get back into the worlds of having student performance reports. You can imagine how different they're going to look just from the conversations that we had tonight. That wasn't even intended to talk about this work, right? You saw it surface talking about 2-3, right? The movement and the scheduling at Dow's Lane currently. Think of the conversation that we had in and around student growth data and student achievement data. Think of the conversation that we had about an initiative that we're going to be starting, but the data dive that's already happening associated with student placement based upon race, ethnicity, and socioeconomics. So you can just see how the culture has changed. So that toe dipping certainly helped us, because you see the comfort level and the ease at which we're running with it. So the updates to the plan is going to look to capture all of this. So it's going to be the data component, and the data is coming from something. It's coming from the assessments, right? So the assessments are going to be constantly updated, but there's going to be new assessment processes that we're going to implement to ensure that we'll be able to monitor growth in an effective manner.
No, that's helpful. And I know we've talked a lot about data at the board level, because really at the end of the day, that's the how we know part. And it's something that the board has been very focused on. So it's, I think this conversation is helping to bring all of those strands together. And we certainly look forward to the updated, robust data plan, which will, have in one place, what is our data warehouse looking like, and what capabilities we still want to build out, so we know where we're going. And I think just for a board level, be helpful, for the, how do we know parts and some of the evidence, seeing at the appropriate time what assessments have been changed, what assessments have we added, just so we see, not the actual assessments and deep dive that way, but just to get a sense of how things have been moving and the shifts that have been made, and what the plan is for the next year or two after that to keep moving and analyzing, looking at, because it's great to have the goals and set forth the artifacts in terms of where we'll seek them go. But I think for the board to return to this work and see the concrete examples would be really helpful in seeing the work.
So I would say that I think there's going to be opportunities, certainly where there's going to be new assessments that will be developed or new approaches to assessing. But what is going to be the key component of this is because we have a lot of assessments that exist, but we need to be able to use the term warehouse. So that idea that you can look and easily manipulate and align data and assess things through a variety of different lenses. So you have things living and breathing in one particular space. So you could find we keep talking about relationships, right? You could find those connections that exist. So that, to me, is like where the key leap is going to be, because that work is the other assessment work is ongoing, and it's going to keep happening. Now it's going to be how are we going to capture it, how are we going to document it, and how are we going to use it to inform.
No, exactly. I think that's the conversation we've been having for a while, and seeing it all come together is very heartening. And if you go back to looking just at the Dow's Lane discussion, we talked about F&P, about mid-module and end-of-module assessments. We talked about the AIMSweb data. We have a lot of data sources. I think, as you were saying, it's getting that all in a place where it's linkable and be able to use, but then also training our instructional leaders and the rest of the staff in terms of what to, how we want to use and analyze it, because obviously data can be used lots of different ways. We want to obviously try to use it in the most effective way.
Yeah.
So I think, certainly there'll be more to come and appreciate, but I think just, from the board level, when we go back to look at how we achieve the goals, seeing some of the artifacts and understanding, obviously some of them are going to be deliverables, a new data plan, that's easy. We'll see what that looks like, but some of the other ones which don't have, a specific deliverable, but understanding, at least in a summary fashion, how the work moved over the course of the year, and also, where we may still want to go and what we may want to do over the next year, 2, 3 years, just so we can see the continuum and continue to have these check-ins, because I think we have a tendency to, as a board, if we go too long without talking about, I think we all start to forget some of it. So I think, looking at some regular check-ins around the process, since it's, such an important part of the work, and something that I know, going back, now 4 or 5 years we've been talking about. So, but I again, really thank you very much for tonight's presentation. I think it's very helpful to set the stage for where we're going.
Right, thank you.
So with that, we'll move to our consent agenda. I will say, for whatever reason, my computer is now shutting itself down. So if the trustees or need anything, deal with Dave. Uh, Any questions on tonight's consent agenda? So if we can get a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda?
So move.
So we got Maura and
moved.
Beth Moore, perfect. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So, Dr. Harrison, I'll turn over to you for your usual highlights on some
Yeah,
of the
so,
actions tonight.
One thing that I think is really important is to draw everyone's attention to item number 7.1 on the business of the board. It is a resolution that will be then sent off to our state legislature, state education department, seeking support and leadership from the state education department and making sure that the state steps up and delivers on their responsibilities to support testing and the management of testing in our schools. Certainly, as I highlighted at the top of the meeting, we're doing work, and I can't wait to announce the wonderful partner that we're going to be working with to administer the testing. But we need the state to step up. The state should be supporting this. We should not be paying for it with local tax dollars that should be educating our children. And they need to make sure that they provide tests. I can tell you that we're being promised by the Westchester County Department of Health that we will receive the tests. But when the time comes, I want to make sure that we have the test in hand. I've heard stories around the state, in particular our friends in Rockland, where they have struggled to receive the support from the Department of Health that is necessary. So, here in Irvington, we're going to fulfill our responsibilities. And even if the state doesn't provide tests, we're going to work with our partner to acquire tests so that we can have the necessary testing completed. And then we can all write a nice letter and send the bill to our governor if they don't fulfill their responsibilities. But this resolution calls upon our state leaders to step up and make sure they fulfill their responsibilities on this front. And I thank the board and each trustee for their support of that. I would also like to welcome someone who is a new employee to the district, who is going to be taking on another incredible role, Mr. Dave Boykin. Dave was hired to be our boys varsity basketball coach this year, but we're excited to welcome him to the Main Street School community as a leave replacement special education teacher. And I can tell you that Mr. Boykin is thrilled to be joining our team at Dow's Lane, and I believe that he'll be an awesome addition there as well. You can see we have a number of other appointments of a new teacher aide, some additional school monitors. And I want to certainly welcome them to the district. As an aside, we need substitutes, we need monitors if you're interested in working for the district. And a shout out to all of our graduates from Irvington High School that are out there that may be attending college from home. We need you. If you're interested, reach out to me, please. We need some subs and we need more monitors. And then I do want to thank the PTSA for their continued support and funding a number of critical grants that are going to be certainly important in continuing to make this year a fabulous one for our students.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. Also, thank you to the PTSA for all of their wonderful grants. Now we have our second community comment period. So if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you're invited to do so. Please put your name and address in the Zoom Q&A function. So we'll just pause for a minute to see if there are any further comments. Dr. Harrison, are you seeing any?
Nope.
Perfect.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot your computer shut down. No, there are none.
Thank you. So our next meeting will be December 8th, and we'll announce the details in advance of that meeting. So if we can have a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
We are adjourned. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Stay safe and see you next month.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay.